Have you ever wondered what society's less well-to-do tended to eat back in the 70s? Then you should join us, as we'll be taking a deep dive into what poor people ate for breakfast in the 1970s. One, cornmeal mush.
Today we are going to be making cornmeal mush.
Cornmeal mush was filling, nutritious, affordable, and easy to whip up. Basically everything you needed for an ideal breakfast. It was also an incredibly adaptable dish in all the ways you could make it, and all the sides you could serve it with. You could eat it on its own like a cereal if you wanted, you could chill it for later, or you could even fry it. For breakfast in particular, you couldn't go wrong with slathering the dish with syrup before you dug into it. It was a meal of preference for lower-income people back then, as it provided both a cheap and easy way to fuel both working parents and children for the hectic days ahead. Dried cornmeal was pretty cheap and could keep for a really long time, so you could buy it in bulk and let it serve you for months. The introduction of the breakfast bars and packaged treats in later decades would spell the end of the dish's popularity in an era where people wanted more sweetness from the first meal of the day. Here's how you make cornmeal mush. Mix together water, cornmeal, and salt. Let it cook over medium heat till the mixture thickens for about 5 to 7 minutes. Make sure you stir it constantly while it's on fire. If you want to eat it as a breakfast cereal, you could scoop it into a bowl and serve with milk and sugar. Not unlike cornmeal mush, our next breakfast dish was convenience in a package. 2 ramen noodles.
I'm going to show you how to make a quick and easy chicken ramen ready in 20 minutes.
If you weren't wolfing down ramen as a kid back in the 70s, you almost definitely ended up doing so as a struggling college student. At this point, ramen noodles are basically the stereotypical idea of the meal you resort to when you hit hard times. And it's a shame that ramen noodles have earned such a reputation because they're made well. It's an incredibly savory dish. Ramen traces its roots to a Chinese culinary tradition that goes back millennia, one in which noodles were a crucial staple. What we now know as ramen isn't too different from early Chinese noodle soups, with their rich, meaty broths that were full of veggies and packed with seasoning. But for people on a tight budget back then, ramen noodle breakfasts couldn't afford to be so decadent. Most of the flavor for the noodles came from leftover broth and yesterday's pot roast. That way, the dish stayed economical while still managing to be decent. Anyway, here's the basic recipe for some good old breakfast ramen. Mix some noodles with leftover broth and boil it in a saucepan for a few minutes, stirring it constantly. Then lower the heat and add in soy sauce, chili oil, and ginger. Let it simmer for about 10 minutes, then stir in sesame oil if you have some. And there you have it, a prime 70s survival dish, much like the next dish on the list. 3 biscuits and sausage gravy.
Sausage, gravy, and biscuits, well, you've come to the right place, my friends.
Biscuits and sausage gravy was another one of many Southern staples that was born out of hard times. Like a lot of dishes from the 70s, we're not really sure how they're made. It's still very much a topic of debate, but a lot of people believe that it originated from Southern Appalachian lumber mills in the 1800s. The hearty nature of the dish and its affordable ingredients quickly made it a staple among the low-income working class. The high-calorie dish made for a delicious, satisfying, nutritious, and incredibly cheap dish for laborers. This breakfast dish was the perfect combination of light and warm fluffy buttermilk biscuits with a creamy, rich sausage gravy seasoned with black pepper. It was an interesting culinary experience with a unique mix of flavors and a mix of ingredients that would practically melt in your mouth. It was the perfect comfort food, but it was more than that. For decades, it was a cornerstone of Southern cuisine, the answer to everyone's breakfast needs. But all that wouldn't last forever, and biscuits and the masterpiece that is sausage gravy would fall out of favor with the working poor following the introduction of simpler dishes. While biscuits and sausage gravy are still enjoyed by people around the country, it is not as popular as it once was. The dish seems to be making a gradual comeback in recent times, much like the next breakfast dish on the list. 4 potato pancakes.
The potato pancakes, one of my favorite potato preparations.
Potatoes are a global staple, in no small part due to how affordable they are and the many ways you could cook them. Think about it. How many other plants could you make pancakes from? Potato pancakes were a working-class American staple right from when they were brought into the U.S. by immigrants in the late 19th century until well into the 20th century. From what we know, the dish was first a cultural staple of Jewish cuisine known as latke, after which the 18th century rolled around and it became an Eastern European staple. The hearty dish was a lifesaver for people with tight budgets and bust lifestyles back in the day. The ingredients were really cheap. It went well with a lot of sides, and it was really easy to cook. Potato pancakes were a surefire way to start busy days right back then. To make it, You just combine potatoes, onion, eggs, flour, salt, and pepper, and stir it till it's well combined. Then drop the potato batter in large spoonfuls in a hot skillet. Then flatten the batter and let it cook for about 4 minutes per side till it's golden brown. If you're looking for some packaged food that was even easier to make, maybe you'd like this next treat. 5. Rice-a-roni.
Today I want to share with you a homemade rice-a-roni
There
recipe.
really was no bad time to eat the rice-a-roni, and for the people that love to eat it for breakfast, the treat was filling enough to help people power through the hectic mornings. When you look at cereal box, you expect to see cereal instead of a fully packaged meal. But that's what you got with rice-a-roni. Rice-a-roni was a ready-made food mix of rice and vermicelli pasta browned in butter, with water and seasonings added and then slightly simmered and served. The mix was invented in 1958 by Vince De Domenico, the son of an Italian immigrant. The original rice-a-roni recipe was just the product of adding a dry chicken soup mix to rice and macaroni. When it first came out, it was introduced to American Northwest, and just a few years later, rice-a-roni would be a nationwide success. Its major selling point and the key to its popularity was how it effectively took away the hassle of having to prepare such an elaborate dish from scratch. It just needed to be seasoned, simmered, and served. And for something that tasted that great, this was a steal. It was exactly what extremely busy people with tight budgets needed back in the 60s and 70s. But sadly, rice-a-roni would fade into obscurity in the 80s and 90s when concerns began about the level of processing and the amount of additives present in the food mix. People were looking for something healthier by then. Our next budget-friendly would meet Preet, much the same fate. 6 breakfast in a can.
Today's video is another What Are We Eating video, and today's featured food is Hunger Breaks All Day Breakfast in a Can.
This dish was basically just a standard English breakfast in a can. Nothing more, nothing less. It was about as traditional a dish like this could get. A mixture of baked beans, sausages, mushrooms, chopped pork, bacon, and potato chunks combined with cereal. For the people just struggling to get by in the 70s, this hearty dish was the perfect way to kick off your day with nourishment and energy. It wasn't the biggest hit when it crossed over from the UK to the US, but for the people that knew its value, it was the epitome of convenience. None of the ingredients for the canned meal were particularly off-putting, but overall the dish was just okay at best. But oftentimes, people found this meal very unpalatable and only returned to it because they had no other options. The baked beans tasted terrible, like anything but beans. The pork was bland, unseasoned, and textureless. Overall, it wasn't really something people liked. At best, it was something they put in their stomachs to get them through the day. Thankfully, this next breakfast treat was far more enjoyable. 7 Scrapple sandwich.
Today, I'm going to show you how to make the sexiest scrapple sandwich you've ever seen.
Scrapple sandwich was the perfect dish for people just trying to get by in the 70s. It was just another humble sandwich, pretty easy to make while still packing a world of flavor with every bite. It first hit the scene in the US back in the start of the 20th century, but it really took off in the 60s and 70s when hearty, nutritious meals were more of the norm for the average breakfast. It had everything you were looking for in a proper homemade sandwich: volume, flavor, and nutrition. It was also pretty straightforward to make. Only downside was it took about 20 minutes to make. All you need is some scrapple, some instant flour, some black pepper, a few splashes of butter, a couple slices of cheese, some eggs, a few slices of white bread, and some freshly squeezed orange juice to top it all off. It faded in popularity towards the end of the century as people started to prefer simpler recipes and sandwiches became more of a fast food option. Just like the next sandwich on the list, though, it's still a staple in a lot of American homes today. 8 breakfast grits.
They are so delicious, creamy, and flavorful. You have to try it.
Breakfast grits is probably what comes to mind when most people think of a standard nourishing American breakfast. It was an incredibly hearty, straight-to-the-point meal and a generational favorite, especially for the middle and lower class back in the mid-20th century. Like dishes for working people back then needed to be, breakfast grits were really easy to make and needed just a few ingredients. They were a staple for everyone eating on a budget back in the 70s, from college students to struggling families. Now let's get into how it was made. Start by boiling some water and salt. Then whisk some grits into it for about a minute and leave it to keep boiling. When it's done this time, turn the heat down and let it cook for another 10 to 15 minutes, making sure to stir it frequently while you do so. Finally, remove your grits from the heat and add cheese, butter, and pepper, letting everything mix well. Stir it for a few minutes until butter and cheese are melted and it's ready to eat. It was something you'd always have time to make, even on the busiest of mornings. But it didn't any more convenient than cereals, though. 9 Wheat honeys.
Free in packages of Nabisco wheat honeys and rice honeys.
Wheat honeys were everywhere back in their heyday. These sweet cereals were just about as easy a breakfast to make as it got. These instant meals were particularly popular with children. A lot of adults were eating it too, but mostly because it was what they could get their hands on at the time. Wheat honeys first hit the market as Ranger Joe Popped Wheat Honeys in the early 1940s. Interestingly enough, Ranger Joe Popped Wheat Honeys were probably the very first sugar-coated cereal ever. It would be much later in 1954, when the brand was bought up by the National Biscuit Company, that the name of the cereal would change. It became a major staple back in the 50s after the name change, but by the end of the 60s, the sales of the cereal started to drop. It would take another name change at the start of the 70s, this time to Winnie the Pooh Great Honey Crunchers, to revive the brand, at least briefly. Despite another name change in the mid-70s to Klondike Pete's Crunchy Nuggets, the brand would continue on its decline till it would get discontinued by the end of the decade. The sweet, crunchy goodness of wheat honeys wasn't enough to save it from eventual decline. On to our next cereal staple, 10 Cap'n Crunch.
Whoa, new cinnamon Cap'n Crunch?
Cap'n Crunch, the corn and oat breakfast cereal brand that's been around for decades at this point. The original Cap'n Crunch recipe was made in 1963 by Pamela Lowe to recall a recipe of brown sugar and butter her grandmother served over rice at her home in New Hampshire. Cap'n Crunch was one of the very first cereals to lock in its flavor with an oil coating, an innovative packaging idea that would go to shape the way cereals were made afterwards. It was one of the first cereals to use an oil coating to deliver its flavoring, which required an innovative baking process. There's no way you could have grown up as a 70s kid without experiencing the goodness of Cap'n Crunch cereal. It was more than just a popular cereal. It was a cultural staple on the level of which very few treats would ever reach. Beyond its fantastic branding and affordability, the secret to Cap'n Crunch was just how well it hit the right notes when it came to taste. It was just the right amount of sweet, and it was crunchy, but not to the point where eating it was a chore. It appealed to a wide range of palates, from children to working adult. It was also pretty versatile, and it was just as good if you were eating it with water as it was with milk. Cap'n Crunch was a safe breakfast option for families at the time, most especially lower-income ones. Next up on the list, we'll be looking at a Southern classic, 11 beans and cornbread.
Meals that you can make that don't require a lot of ingredients or are pretty inexpensive to make. Today we're going to be trying one that was suggested to me many times, which is Southern style beans and cornbread.
Cornbread is just about as Southern as it gets. People eat in all sorts of ways and take it with everything down south. Whether you want it baked it into a pie in a skillet, cut up into little pieces, crumbled into a glass of buttermilk or a can of creamed corn, there's an endless number of ways for you to enjoy this savory treat. But one particular combination stands above them all, and that's, of course, baked beans with cornbread. It was a savory, tasty combination, easy to whip up and filling enough to help you power through busy mornings. What made it attractive to the lower-income families at the time was just how cheap the ingredients were and how simple the recipe was. Of course, you always just spoon some baked beans into a bowl and eat it with cornbread. That's what most people did. But for people who had the time to try out authentically Southern cuisine, here's how it was made. Beans and bacon is dropped in a pot and left to boil and then simmer for about 2 hours till the beans is tender and forms a thick broth. It's only towards the end of the cooking time that you should season the beans with salt and pepper and maybe some chili and garlic for extra flavor. If you want to garnish it a little more, you can't go wrong by serving it up with a side of grated cheese or cilantro. For our next meal, we'll be moving from an authentic Southern delicacy to a ready-made convenience treat, 12 hamburger helper.
Plus, we have homework, which leaves 0 time for dinner.
With 30 quick and tasty one-pan meals.
I'm gonna keep helper handy.
Hamburger Helper was breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everything else you could ask for in a cardboard box. The packaged General Mills pasta brand Fit hit the market in 1971 in response to the scarcity of meat at the time. So, it goes without saying that this brand was basically designed as a quick meal for people on a tight budget at the time. While General Mills also pushed out other variations of the brand, like Tuna Helper and Chicken Helper, neither of them would take off as much with America's meat-loving public. When you peeled away at the box, what you got was some dried pasta or rice with powdered seasonings in a packet. Then it would be up to you to cook it with some ground beef, water, and maybe milk to create a complete dish from it. The hamburger helper was beloved not just for its decent taste and instant convenience. Anyone who grew up eating hamburger helper would definitely fondly remember the hamburger helper mascot, the helping hand. The four-fingered left-hand white glove with a face on the palm and a red round nose was a core part of the hamburger helper brand, a big part of what made it so beloved. Our next breakfast treat might have been even more beloved though. 13. Bologna and cheese sandwich.
Day to relive all them childhood memories about the best sandwich you ever had in your life. The classic bologna sandwich, even better.
Bologna is an incredibly versatile piece of meat. Usually made from a ground mixture of different meats, the delicately cured and spiced meat was the go-to source of nourishment for the working poor across generations. It was incredibly cheap, really easy to cook. It kept well, and you could make a whole lot of recipes with it. Bologna sandwiches first became popular at the height of the suffering and scarcity of the Great Depression and the Second World War, a point when it was by far the most affordable type of meat available. But it would take the prosperity of the mid-20th century to make the bologna sandwich, and its popular variation, the bologna and cheese sandwich, into a cultural staple. This pocket-friendly dish would be a time saver and a lifesaver for people with few food options at the time. Another thing that took the sandwich further into prominence was the public perception that bologna was cleaner than meat at the butcher shop. Bologna and cheese sandwiches were the go-to breakfast for people on a budget back in the 70s and 80s. It was what the government turned to feed migrant workers for decades from the 40s to the 60s. It was the meal food pantries were most likely to dish out back then. The unfortunate side effect of that is a lot of people now associate the sandwich with poverty. Here's how they made it. Just grill a slice of buttered bread on a skillet, cover it with American cheese and bologna, close it with another slice of bread, grill the other side till it's lightly browned and it's ready to eat. This next sandwich was even more of a convenience meal for lower income people back then. 14. Peanut butter and Miracle Whip sandwich.
Peanut butter, lettuce, Miracle Whip, Allie's favorite. She hates Miracle Whip.
I hate it. Cheers.
Anyone who grew up on hard times definitely remembers the taste of Miracle Whip. Miracle Whip was developed as an even cheaper alternative to mayonnaise, manufactured by Kraft Heinz, and pushed straight into the American market in 1933. The condiment hit the market right at the height of the Great Depression, and in no time, it was massively outselling every single mayonnaise brand. Miracle Whip was similar to mayonnaise in a lot of ways. It was an emulsion of water, soybean oil, high fructose corn syrup, vinegar, modified cornstarch, eggs, salt, natural flavor, mustard flour, potassium sorbate, a mix of spices, and dried garlic. The big difference between them both is that Miracle Whip contains less oil and is a little sweeter than mayonnaise. The name Miracle Whip was super fitting. All you needed to do was spread some of it on a slice of bread and peanut butter on another slice, put it together, and you had a nourishing breakfast at very little cost. We're still not done with sandwiches yet. On to our next breakfast from the past. 15. Mushroom soup and eggs on toast. Mushroom soup and eggs on toast was the perfect way to treat yourself to an instant nutritious breakfast, especially if you were on a tight budget. People back in the 70s would usually just spread some mushrooms on toast, top it with some eggs, and call it a day. But if you're the type to go the extra mile for your meals, here's how you take the mushroom soup to another level. Cook onion and celery in a large pan until tender. Add mushrooms, garlic, and chicken broth to the mix and let the mixture boil. Lower the heat and let the mushrooms cook for about 10 minutes more till they are very tender. Let the mushroom mixture cool and then blend it till it's smooth and set it aside. Then in the same pan, mix heavy cream with some more mushrooms and thyme and cook it for about 5 minutes till the mushrooms are tender. Now you can add the pureed mushroom mixture in the pan. Next, whisk together cornstarch and water until smooth and then stir it into the pan. Then lower the heat on the pan and keep stirring the sauce till it thickens. Once it thickens, stir in sliced eggs, season it, and your homemade mushroom soup with eggs is ready. All that's left to do is enjoy it with toast. The toasty goodness continues with our next breakfast. 16. Cinnamon toast.
Today I'm going to show you how to make cinnamon toast. Oh yeah.
Cinnamon toast was spicy simplicity. It might have been just 2 ingredients, but it was everything you needed from breakfast and more. The touch of cinnamon gave the toast a flavorful edge, and with just 3 incredibly accessible ingredients, You could whip it up in no time. Sure, it wasn't the most nutritious breakfast option out there, but it was enough to carry whole households through the morning, especially if they were just struggling to get by. To make it, just toast 2 bread slices and spread each side with butter. Then, stir together sugar and cinnamon and sprinkle it on the bread slices. Your hot cinnamon toast was ready to serve. There were a lot of ways to enjoy toast back in the 70s, as our next treat would prove. 17 cream tuna on toast.
So simple, so good. My mom used to make it when we were kids, and my brothers and I still love it. I think I'm the only one that still makes it though. It's going to be cream tuna on toast.
Cream tuna on toast was an interesting mix of flavors and textures, and despite its cheapness, it was a pretty tasty and nutritious breakfast option. It was a favorite for college students and societies less privileged, but it was also a popular go-to for people looking for an easy breakfast. All you need to make it is 6 ingredients: margarine, milk, tuna, frozen peas, salt and pepper for seasoning, and some sliced bread. Thaw the frozen peas and melt the margarine, then mix it with some flour and blend. After blending, add milk to the mixture and stir it constantly so it doesn't form clumps. Finally, add the peas, salt and pepper, and warm everything thoroughly. While you're warming that, toast your bread slices. Spoon the tuna mixture on your toast bread, and it's ready to eat. 18 grilled cheese sandwich.
There's grilled cheese and there's great grilled cheese. Here's the right way to make a grilled cheese sandwich.
A grilled cheese sandwich was a breakfast staple in the mid-20th century, and it stayed popular until well into the 70s, where it peaked. This creamy treat was pretty simple. 2 slices of white bread buttered on the outside, with a thick, generous portion. American cheese melted to perfection in the middle. It was just as simple as it was affordable, and twice as delicious. Grilled cheese sandwiches were easy to make in large quantities and passionately loved by the kids, so making them was a no-brainer. That delicious combination of crispy, buttery bread and melted cheese was the perfect comfort food formula. A lot of people back then loved to pair it with tomato soup as dipping sauce, making a great meal even better. Made right, grilled cheese sandwiches were a filling, nutritious meal that packed enough energy to help young and old alike to power through demanding mornings. Much like grilled cheese sandwiches, our next breakfast classic was a tasty but budget-friendly favorite: 19 breakfast casserole.
Today I'm going to show you how to make the best breakfast casserole.
Breakfast casserole was the prefect breakfast meal. It was a great breakfast option for the busy days, and it was also an incredibly tasty time saver on the weekends. It was everything you were looking for in a hearty breakfast. It was a filling dish, could feed a crowd, kept really well. It also both made for great leftovers and was a great way to use leftovers. Name aside, this was a delicacy you could eat at any time of the day or all day if you wanted. Each slice of breakfast casserole was incredibly rich, flavorful, and filling. Another reason breakfast casserole made for an incredibly convenient breakfast was just how adaptable it was. Taste wasn't an issue. You could tweak its recipe to include your favorite seasonings, cheeses, and vegetables, or you could just made it vegan altogether. It was pretty easy to throw together, so it was perfect for a quick early morning breakfast. To make it, start by greasing a baking pan and arranging some cut-up hash brown into it. Then place the sausage and onion in a large skillet and let it cook for 10 minutes till the sausage is browned and crumbled. While you're doing that, whisk some eggs, milk, onion powder, garlic powder, salt, and pepper together in a large bowl until the mixture properly combines. Then pour it over the potatoes and sprinkle it with cheddar cheese. Top it with the sausage mixture and sprinkle it with some extra cheddar. Finally, cover it with aluminum foil and bake it for about an hour. Then, remove the foil and put it back into the oven for another 10 minutes, and the dish was ready to eat. Now, on to the last dish for today: 20 sardine sandwiches. Our next dish might not have the fanciest recipe or be the tastiest treat, but it was still everyone's favorite sandwich. It was a very simple dish to make. It kept very well and packed a punch of nutrients. A few bites of a sardine sandwich with a warm cup is really all you need to start your day, especially if you have a hectic schedule. To whip up this simple staple, start by hard-boiling eggs, peeling and letting them sit in a bowl. Toast your bread in a toaster on both sides, then mash those eggs. Add the sardines into the mashed eggs and mash that too. Then add chopped onions, tomato, mayonnaise, mustard and pepper seasoning cube, and mix everything together. Spread mayonnaise on top of one slice of bread and put some lettuce on it, then scoop some of the sardine mixture on the lettuce on the bread and cover with another lettuce. Spread mayonnaise on another slice of bread and cover the sandwich. Then just cut up the sandwich and enjoy. And that's it for the video, guys. Which one of these meals would you like to try out? Were you a fan of any of these treats growing up? Which dishes do you think we might have left out? Feel free to tell us in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.